Professor Habib, who is Vice Chancellor and Principal of Wits University.
Thank you very much. Let me kick off by thanking the Oliver and Adelaide Tambo Foundation for partnering Wits. It's an honor from Wits' side to be partnering the foundation and to really enhancing the legacy of Oliver Tambo. And I think that if we're going to enhance the legacy of Oliver Tambo this evening, then one of the things that we must do is speak to the essential character of Oliver Tambo. And the essential character of Oliver Tambo in the 30 years that he led the ANC was that he confronted the challenges squarely. He didn't flinch from them. He recognized what they were, and then he said, let's address them in as pragmatic a way as possible. And so if today we're going to do that, what I'd like to do is Kolekani, speak truth to power, to explain what the effective challenge of implementing the NDP is. And then, in conversation with everybody, exploring how we can move forward in this regard. Now, I do want to say that I think that there's a lot of positive things in the NDP. It's a big document. It says some very important things about corruption. It makes a number of very useful recommendations with regards to administrative reforms in the state. It has a good chapter on education. Its health chapter raises some fairly important issues about how to get healthcare to poor people. It raises a whole range of very important things. But I do think that the NDP has two significant challenges. And the first is it ducks the fundamental question of inclusive development. And the fundamental question of inclusive development is inequality. How do you address inequality? It's not poverty. I think the NDP addresses poverty. But the fundamental question of sorting out society is how do we address inequality, because inequality polarizes society and it creates what political scientists and sociologists call relative deprivation. Relative deprivation is your sense of unhappiness is determined by your reference point. And in a highly unequal society, you get particularly unhappy. So I think it was Zwelinzima Vavi who used the word the ring of fire in Gauteng. The places that have the most amount of violent service delivery protests is not the poorest places. It's the places in the closest proximity of wealth. It's the places where inequality is particularly manifest. Now, the way the NDP says you're going to deal with inequality is by dealing with poverty. And so it makes a whole series of recommendations. Industrial targeting, education, skills mobility, legal reform for small businesses, employment creation, all of which I think is important. But this is the dilemma of inequality. As you get those things happening, you'll start dealing with poverty and you'll start dealing with growth in the economy. But you won't deal with inequality, because this is the dilemma of inequality. As you have employment happening and you have poverty alleviation at the bottom, the guys on the top, people like me and you, will grow faster than the guys at the bottom. Very simply because the guys on the top have some things that the guys at the bottom don't have. They have stocks, they have bonds, they have property. And so as growth happens in the economy, these guys grow, but these guys grow faster. That is the story of the last 20 years in South Africa. It's the story of China. It's the story of India. And that's the dilemma. If you think inequality is the problem, then you're not addressing inequality by those proposals. You're addressing poverty, and you're hoping inequality will be dealt with. But inequality is not going to be dealt with, and the last 30 years is examples of this. The trick about getting inequality down is you have to deal with two problems. One, as these guys go from the bottom, you have to hold these guys at the top. Can't help it. You have to hold them down. Or You make these guys grow faster from the bottom than the guys on the top, and the example is Brazil. That question is ducked by the NDP. And I know they know it. It's just inconvenient. I can tell you I've had conversations with them. They duck the question because it's a difficult question to handle. And the problem is this. I know it's a difficult question to handle. But if you duck your question, you're deluding yourself that you're dealing with inequality. What you'll be dealing with is poverty and not inequality. So that's the first thing that I want. The second is if you're going to make this happen, I think Kalikani was right. What you need is a pact. You need an agreement between different stakeholders in society. Now, if you're going to make that happen, there's two things that have to happen. Firstly, within the ruling party, people have to have a coherent plan. If you speak to Ibrahim Patel, Rob Davies, they tell you one thing. If you speak to, at one point, Trevor Manuel, or Praveen Gordon, or now even Nene, they tell you something else. Everybody's told you this. There's a incoherence in what you're hearing. And unless you create the coherence within the party, you're in trouble. Now, what you need is you need somebody to bring Ibrahim and Rob and Nene and Praveen around the table and say, these are the trade-offs. We're going to have to make some trade-offs. Let's understand them. That's the first thing. The second is once you've got a coherence in the party, you need a coherence in the society. You need somebody and the party leading a conversation between the state, labor, and business on that question. And you have to start understanding that if you want to get a pact going, all sides have to make concessions. If you read, every time you read business, look at the Sunday Times, they had one, each one hire one columns. And they had CEOs writing. Every one of them, if you ask them, how do you resolve the problem? They said, get rid of the LRA. That's the only thing that they wanted. That this is the challenge. Even if you believe it, that you'll resolve all of the problems with the LRA, do you really believe that COSATU, after 40 years of struggle, is going to say, okay, never mind, take the LRA and get rid of it? Is it really going to happen? So I think there needs to be an understanding that you have to talk about executive remuneration. You have to talk about other concessions that business has to put on the table around this. But if business has to make concessions, so does labor. And the problem with labor is too often it's not comfortable with the heavy compromises that a pact does require. So for instance, our big challenge in our society is 30%, 35% of our people are unskilled or semi-skilled. You're never going to get them jobs in the banking sector or the IT sector. Give them as much training as you want. Not going to happen. So what you're going to have to do is grow sectors that are labor intensive. Textiles, construction, agriculture. That does mean wages have to be looked at. But as much as you make a concession on wages, you should be looking at investments in the social wage. So you cut a pact. Your deal with the unskilled and the semi-skilled is we can't give you the jobs you want, but we'll invest in education to ensure that your children get the jobs they want. That's the trade-off. It's the implicit pact. But that kind of hard conversation is not happening. So when we have a debate on the NDP, and I'll end here, the debate becomes between capitalism versus socialism. That's not a serious debate in this context. The real debate is, look, the market economy is here whether we like it or not. What is the balance of regulation and how do we structure that regulation? That's the debate. And that's not what's happening. That the real people are not sitting around the table and having that hard debate. We had the debate in NEDLAC. All of the mid-ranking managers are in NEDLAC. The real guys are not where the debate should be. And that's what we need if we're going to be serious about the implementation of the NDP. Thank you very, very much.